Dive. You know how sometimes you read something and it leaves you with like way more questions than answers?
Oh, yeah.
That's what we're tackling today.
I like it.
We're going to dive into this recent General Conference talk from Elder Alan D. Haynie
Okay.
of the 70.
Mm-hmm.
It's titled A Living Prophet for the Latter Days.
Right?
And it's really thought-provoking.
It is?
We're going to unpack this idea of prophets, especially like in our world today,
Yeah.
and explore like why someone might choose to actually follow a prophet's guidance, even when it's tough.
Yeah, you've come to the right place because that's a question that I think a lot of people are asking today.
Totally.
And what I think is so fascinating about this particular talk is how Elder Haynie connects the dots between prophecy and personal revelation.
Yeah.
And how to navigate the complexities of the latter days.
Right.
It's about more than just understanding what a prophet is, but like why that even matters.
Right.
In a world that can feel increasingly chaotic.
Right. Totally. And he starts off with this like really relatable story about his own experience with personal revelation as like a kid.
Yeah.
Just imagine he's flipping through TV channels.
Okay.
And he lands on General Conference. For listeners who aren't familiar with the LDS faith, that's a twice-a-year event where leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share spiritual guidance.
Right.
So he's flipping through the channels. Yeah. He sees President David O. McKay, the prophet at the time, and just knows. Powerful.
But it's him.
Yeah.
You know?
It's such a powerful illustration of how personal revelation can work.
Right.
It doesn't always have to be this like big dramatic event.
Right.
Sometimes it's this quiet but certain feeling.
Right.
This deep down confirmation that what you're seeing or hearing is true.
Totally.
And what I think is really interesting here is that Elder Haynie doesn't even tell us what he felt.
He invites us to reflect on our own experiences with that.
It makes you wonder how often we're looking for the lightning bolt when really it's about tuning in to that quieter, like, inner voice.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Have you ever had an experience like that where you just knew something to be true,
Yeah.
but you didn't know how you knew?
All the time.
Right.
I think we all have, we just don't always recognize it as that.
Yeah.
But I think moving on, Elder Haynie makes a really important distinction about prophets here.
Okay.
He emphasizes that they're not just speaking from like their own opinions or ideas, right?
Okay.
They're prepared.
Right.
And they're sustained by God.
So it's not about blindly following a person.
Exactly.
But trusting in the source of their guidance.
That's exactly right. And I think that is a crucial distinction to make.
Yeah.
Especially as Elder Haynie transitions to talking about these challenging realities of the latter days. He lists things like natural disasters, plagues, wars.
Right.
It's a pretty sobering picture.
It is.
So I guess seeing the state of the world today,
yeah,
do these challenges make you think differently about like the need for guidance?
Yeah.
Like for something beyond our own understanding?
It's interesting because he doesn't just present these challenges like in a vacuum. Right. You know, he connects them to this idea that in times of uncertainty, people naturally seek guidance.
Totally.
Something to hold on to.
Yeah.
Like, think about it. Yeah. When you're facing a difficult decision, don't you often seek advice from somebody you trust?
That's right.
Someone with more experience?
Of course.
So imagine having access to guidance from someone who can see beyond the present.
Totally.
Someone who understands the bigger picture. Yeah. The eternal perspective. That's what a prophet offers.
That's exactly right.
And it reminds me of that story.
What's that?
That he shares about President Nelson and the water bottles.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a funny anecdote, but it illustrates this point.
Okay.
About following prophetic guidance. Even in those seemingly small things.
Right.
So picture this.
Okay.
President Nelson's in the church administration building cafeteria with Presidents Oaks and Ehring. Okay. They're all having lunch. Right. They finish up. President Nelson flattens his water bottle to make it easier to recycle. Right. And then Presidents Oaks and Ehring, without hesitation, immediately start flattening their water bottles too.
Interesting.
President Nelson even like shows President Ehring a more efficient technique.
Wow.
It's a lighthearted moment.
It is.
But it reveals something really important, I think. Okay. About the hierarchy. Right. And flow of information within the church.
So interesting.
It's like, okay, well, if the prophet is doing that, it must be important.
Right.
Right.
Fascinating.
It made me reflect on, like, my own response to prophetic counsel.
Yeah.
Do I approach it with that same kind of eagerness to align my actions even in the small things?
Right.
Or am I more hesitant?
It's a good question.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to, like, I think a really crucial point in his talk, especially for anyone who's raising children. This idea of generational responsibility.
Okay.
He argues that parents who question or selectively follow prophetic counsel risk passing that uncertainty on to their children.
Right.
And what kind of impact does that have on the next generation?
I'm really curious to unpack that more.
Me too.
Well, it's about more than just like the action itself, right? It's the message it sends.
Totally.
Like if children see their parents questioning or cherry picking which counsel to follow.
Right.
What does that teach them about the role of a prophet in their lives?
Yeah, it's almost like saying, well, I respect the prophet, but.
Exactly.
Right? But.
Yeah. And that but can speak volumes.
For sure.
Especially to a younger generation that's navigating a world that's just saturated with information and conflicting viewpoints.
Yeah, and Elder Haynie draws this really interesting parallel to parents who relax their standards of conduct over time.
Okay.
Suggesting that children might then see that as permission to, like, go even further.
Right.
Pushing the boundaries even more.
It's that slippery slope idea.
Yeah.
But applied to spiritual commitment.
Yeah.
Just as, like, small deviations in behavior can have these ripple effects.
Totally.
So, too, can a casual disregard for prophetic counsel.
Right.
It can erode trust, not just in the prophet himself, but in the very source of that guidance.
And if you don't trust the source,
right,
where does that leave you?
Adrift.
Yeah, adrift.
Yeah, palely unmoored.
And feeling adrift is the last thing anybody needs.
Right.
So especially with all the challenges that we've been talking about.
Especially what Elder Haynie's outlining. Exactly. He even quotes Elder Neil A. Maxwell, who was another leader in the LDS faith, who warned of a time when events are likely to require each member to decide whether or not he or she will follow the first presidency.
Wow.
And that's the prophet and his two counselors who lead the church.
Yeah, that feels really relevant.
It does, right?
Like there's this pressure to choose a side.
Yeah, and choosing to follow prophetic counsel becomes less about blind obedience.
Right.
And more about building that foundation of trust, that inner compass, to guide us through uncertainty.
So what about those who feel like they're playing catch up? Like maybe they haven't always prioritized following the prophet, or they've like drifted from that commitment. Right. Is there hope for them?
I think that's where Elder Haynie offers a really beautiful message of hope.
Okay.
And a really important call to action.
Okay.
He emphasizes that power of repentance,
of
starting anew. He says, if that is the case, then repent. Begin again to follow the counsel of God's chosen prophet.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's never too late.
It's never too late.
To realign our lives.
That's right.
With that prophetic counsel.
It's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about progress. It's a journey.
It is.
And just like any journey,
totally,
there could be bumps along the way.
Sure.
There could be moments of doubt, of questioning.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of it.
Totally.
You know, it's in those moments where we're wrestling that our faith is refined.
Absolutely.
Right.
Having that trust in prophetic counsel as an anchor can make all the difference.
Right.
Elder Haynie seems to be saying that this alignment, this willingness to trust in prophetic guidance, even when we don't fully understand, will be essential for navigating what he calls the heat of the latter days.
The heat. And he uses this other really powerful metaphor.
What's that?
The adversary's increasingly darker and more confusing mists.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is so descriptive.
It is.
And so relevant.
It is, and it makes you think about, like, what are those mists?
Right.
He's talking about spiritual opposition.
Right.
The forces that are literally trying to pull us away from truth and light.
So we need that beacon.
We do.
That source of direction.
Yes.
To guide us through those mists.
We need those landmarks to help us find our way back.
And for those of the LDS faith, that beacon is the prophet.
That's right. And it takes a certain amount of humility to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have all the answers.
Right.
And even more humility to trust that someone else might be able to see what we can't.
You're right. It's like trusting the pilot of a plane.
Ooh, I like that.
Right.
It's good.
Even when you hit turbulence.
Yeah.
you might not understand, like, the mechanics of flight.
Right.
Or, what's happening.
Yeah.
But you trust that they have the training.
Yeah, the experience.
The experience.
And they have access to information that you don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about blind obedience.
Right.
It's about recognizing there's a bigger picture at play.
And that's ultimately what Elder Haynie's inviting us to do.
Yeah.
Is to trust in the Lord's chosen pilot, the living prophet, as we navigate the turbulence of the latter days.
And that trust, that willingness to follow even when we don't, like, totally get it.
Yeah.
That takes faith.
It does. It takes faith in a power beyond ourselves.
Right.
Faith that there's this divine plan unfolding.
Right.
Even when we can't see the whole picture.
And so much of what we've talked about today goes back to that.
I know.
That idea of navigating uncertainty.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is more relevant now than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think Elder Haynie's talk gives us this really powerful framework for doing just that. He reminds us that personal revelation is ongoing, that we can receive guidance, confirmation for our own lives.
Right.
He emphasizes the importance of trusting in the source of prophetic counsel.
Right.
Recognizing that it's not about the man delivering the message.
Right.
It's about aligning ourselves with something so much greater.
It's like he's saying, look, the world's going to get messy. Things might not always make sense.
Yeah.
But you don't have to navigate it alone.
You don't have to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that message of hope, that reassurance that we have access to divine guidance, I think is incredibly powerful.
It is, don't you think?
It makes me think about that quote from Elder Maxwell.
Yeah.
About choosing whether or not to follow the prophet.
Yeah.
It's not just this hypothetical choice.
Right, right.
It's in the everyday decisions
all the time
that we make.
Yeah.
Big and small.
Absolutely. And as Elder Haynie suggests.
Even in those seemingly small acts.
Right.
Like President Nelson and that water bottle, right?
Yeah.
We can find opportunities to align ourselves with prophetic counsel.
Right.
To strengthen that trust and to deepen our faith.
It's been quite a deep dive.
It has.
Thinking back on everything Elder Haynie shared, what stands out to you as like the most important takeaway?
I think if listeners remember one thing from our conversation today, it's that in a world of uncertainty, we don't have to be uncertain.
Right.
We have access to divine guidance.
Yes.
Through personal revelation and through the words of prophets.
Beautifully said. And as we all go about navigating the complexities of our lives, maybe it's worth asking ourselves, how am I seeking that guidance? And how can I more fully align my life with the direction that I receive?
Such a good question to think about.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure being here.